the United Auto Workers strike continues for a fifth day with no breakthroughs and no end in sight, the Biden White House is continuing to walk the tightrope between support for the strikers and not getting too involved. Reuters reporter Jeff Mason tweeted that the White House says POTUS is wearing a red tie today in solidarity with UAW workers across the country. Meanwhile, former President Trump is planning to visit Michigan instead of attending the next GOP debate, mulling making an appearance at the Detroit picket line. This is according to MSNBC. Now, UAW President Shawn Fain doesn't think too highly of Trump's visit to come, telling HuffPost labor reporter David Jamieson, quote, "Every fiber of our union is being poured into fighting the billionaire class and an economy that enriches people like Donald Trump at the expense of workers. We can't keep electing billionaires and millionaires."
Workers don't appear to be thrilled about President Biden either, asked if they want Biden's team to aid with negotiations. This is what they told a Fox Business News reporter. Let's listen.
We are a united group of people. We don't need the president's help.
It's our fight. Let us fight our fight. That's all we want. We don't want to hurt the economy. We don't want to be here not getting paid peanuts. But, it's our fight. Fight for our life.
I think we can negotiate our contract with the company without the government getting involved.
So that's interesting that you heard from people who don't actually want Biden present there.
Yeah,
and I wonder if they got asked about Trump, if they'd say, yeah, we don't want Trump here either. Maybe.
I suspect that is the case. I think that historically the Democratic Party was able to stitch together a coalition after the Southern strategy and realignment based on stridently protecting the interests of workers in the United States. It genuinely was the working class, low income party, and it was able to get that buy-in through the New Deal era by establishing the NLRB, labor protections, and fighting for at least a decade or so on the side of the workers. Then what ended up happening after some Republican victories in the 70s and 80s is that the Democratic Party looked within itself and said, okay, this game isn't working. We need to participate in this new medium of television, which required a lot of fundraising for advertisements and to have better reach. And we're going to start going to those same corporatists the Republican Party has been using to fund its campaigns for the last 20 years and seek them out as well. But the interests of those corporations are fundamentally misaligned with the interests of workers. And so Democratic Party has had one foothold in as a pro-worker party only because workers haven't had another place to go. Because Republicans have shown no interest whatsoever in protecting labor rights or anything like that. Instead, what Republicans do, you see this a lot in these southern states, they establish so-called right-to-work states where there are no new union protections, where you could be fired without cause. They have supported policies, Democrats and Republicans alike, shipping jobs overseas, and workers have felt largely disaffected and have lessened their commitment to either party, but particularly the Republican Party, which never stood a chance. And so now if you're looking at someone like Joe Biden, who potentially might want to fly in and say, hey, I'm standing with workers, I'm the most pro-worker president ever, at the same time that he just crushed what could have been the most historically significant labor actions in American history and the railroad strike just earlier this year, I would be looking askance at him too.
Right. I think it remains to be seen whether they react positively to Trump there. I bet a lot of them will. I mean, this is the kind of mismatch we're dealing with. I mean, the history you just diagnosed is obviously correct. The Republican Party did not have policies that were pro-labor, that certainly were not pro-union. Again, we probably disagree on the fundamentals of those policies, whether they're good ideas or not. I support right to work. I support letting companies ship jobs overseas if that's what is more economically beneficial for them. Sorry. But the Republican Party did stand for those things. It hasn't really changed necessarily. You're right that at the end of the day, the policies aren't different. But the Republican Party does see, I think, to the extent that they've leaned into the cultural stuff, knows that their base is increasingly on cultural issues is more of a working class base. So that's why they talk about those things, because they don't really want to change their economic agenda that much. They don't want to change their economic
agenda. And that's why a moment like this,
Democrats don't want to change their economic agenda either.
But just talking about labor rights is an amazing thing, because we're getting out of all of this partisan bull crap. And there are people that are working at the auto plant that are Republican, that are Democrats, that are lean socially one way or lean socially another way. It's Michigan. It's a purple state. But at the end of the day, they are all united around this fundamental class issue. And I'll tell you who hates that. It's the corporate base of both of these parties. It's the corporate leadership of both of these parties. And that's why you're seeing all of this weird, cringy, mixed messaging across the board. At the end of the culture issues don't matter to anybody who's standing on this picket line. And Ron DeSantis or Donald Trump. I don't know
about that.
Ron DeSantis or Donald Trump showing up and saying, but don't you hate trans people? They don't care. These are people who bargained away some of their substantive rights when there was the auto crisis under the Obama administration, who have been sitting here with stagnant wages while the CEOs of their company are now experiencing 40% hikes in their profit. The CEO making $26 million in salary at the same time that their inflation-adjusted salaries are lower than they were 30 or 40 years ago. CEOs making 360
divvy up
times.
The CEO's salary, send it back to the taxpayers who bailed out all these companies in the first place. That's what I would like to do.
The fundamental issue here is whether or not the labor gains, the profits that are quite obviously being earned by these companies, should be distributed in a way that benefits the people who are doing the work. And Donald Trump understood on some level that there was an enormous public appetite for centering the interests of American workers over the profit shares of shareholders in the bottom line. So he invade against TPP and these policies that sent American jobs overseas and decimated the Rust Belt, decimated the Midwest. And him saying that he was a champion of the people who are working in those areas is part of why he was able to pull so many voters. And he, I think, is savvy enough to understand that, which is why he's making this visit. But at the end of the day, it doesn't seem to me like the people who have experienced those policies and also experienced Donald Trump not fulfilling so many of his promises to reopen all of these companies around America are going to fall for him showing up, but not making explicit commitments to protecting
these
labor.
These are contradictory ideas. If you want businesses to stay in America and to employ Americans, you have to allow the regulatory climate to be favorable to them, and you have to allow them to set the wages that are competitive. Again, if you force them to pay wages or conditions that they don't want to do, then they're going to ship those jobs overseas. Like, that's the reality.
No, what you need to have is worker ownership. And so the decision making is being done by the people who work at these companies that are buying the cars themselves. That used to be part of what people understood about capitalism. And frankly, the capitalists of yesteryears understood that if your own employees can't afford to buy your products, this was Ford's Model T, this was his blueprint. If your workers can't afford to buy the car that you're making, you're going to run out of a market and you're going to go out of business. And so that's the issue here. Do we want more owner-operated industries that are making decisions not on, can I earn 45 cents more on every car, but do I want to sustain my family and my community by keeping the shop here? And you can see the contrast.
If they make the cars unaffordable, they won't be able to sell them, so they have an incentive to keep them
The cars
affordable.
aren't unaffordable. I don't know how many times we all got to say that there's been record profits. The cars are not unaffordable. Americans have been competing really successfully in the global car manufacturing industry because there's been a pivot.
Profits. They're not
because there's been a pivot to a preference among consumers for American-made cars, these big kind of cars, and that's why we've been dominating the market as of late. If you want to get a clear contrast between how Republicans are talking about this issue and how genuinely working class affiliated Democrats or independents like Bernie Sanders are talking about this issue, I want to just roll this clip that the Bernie campaign put together showing the side by side here.
In 1965, during this era of the great middle class expansion in the United States, CEOs made about 20 times what their typical workers made. But as I noted to you, the CEO of GM makes 362 times what her typical employees make. I just want to make sure I get an answer from you. Is that okay? Do you think that's fair?
Well, I think that ought to be left to the shareholders of that company. I'm somebody that believes in free enterprise. I think those are decisions that can be made by shareholders in creating pressure, and I'll fully support how these publicly traded companies operate.
No, I strongly disagree. I think what's going on in America today in terms of income and wealth inequality, the fact that CEOs are now making 400 times more than their average worker, the fact that we have 3 people on top who own more wealth than the bottom half of America, the fact that during the last 50 years, the weekly wages of the average American worker are lower today than they were back then is speaks to the anger that the American people are feeling and what this strike is about. The American people are sick and tired, in my view, Jake, and I've been all over this country. They are sick and tired of corporate greed in which the very richest people are becoming richer. The head of General Motors now makes $29 million a year. And yet if you're a new worker in the big three, you make less than $17 an hour.
And I got to tell you, I don't think it's about the usual fault lines of the difference in salaries between white collar and blue collar.
They have temp workers who are temp year after year after year who make far lower wages than other workers. You have profits there, $21 billion in profits in the first half of this year. So what you're seeing in the automobile industry, in my view, is what we're seeing all over this economy. Greed on the top, suffering on the part of the working class, and people are tired of it.
Wages haven't gone up since the auto bailout in 2008. Meanwhile, the CEOs, their wages have gone up 40% in the last 5 years.
I think, Jake, to tell you the truth, that all of us in this country have got to stand with the UAW now. They're not just fighting for decent wages and benefits for automobile workers. They're really standing up to the kind of corporate greed that is impacting tens and tens of millions of Americans. And what they are really saying, they're saying this to the big three, but I think that message has got to go out all over corporate America. You people on top, you've never had it so good. More income and wealth inequality today than ever in the history of America. Richest people are becoming phenomenally richer. But
Right.
60% of American workers are living paycheck to paycheck. So UAW is standing up against corporate greed, and I applaud them for what they're doing.
Well, look, I agree in part and disagree in part with what both of them are saying, but I'm not going to defend the shareholders or the business structure. Yeah, they are greedy. They're welfare queens. They got bailed out by the American taxpayer. I would have never supported that in a million years. I would have let all those companies fail. If your company fails, that's on you. Sorry. That's how the system works. And and the government sweeping in to reorganize and rescue firms that don't make sound decisions is not the right way to run an economy. So I'm not going to defend their, fine, maybe their profits are illegitimate and should be given back to the American taxpayers. But like on the narrow question of whether the CEO is paid too much, I don't know. I don't really care.
I don't think people need tax cuts. People want to be able to work for a wage that's fair. It's weird to say that we wouldn't want to. The Republican Party seems to be largely adverse to handouts, welfare, all of these things. But at the end of the day, when there are working people who are working hard, who are just saying, I want my salary to be fair. I want to work. And I want my salary to be fair. I want
fair
the pay.
Is what they agree to pay you and what you say yes to.
Right. That's why they're saying no, and that's why they're striking. And this is a big whose side are you
That's
on?
fine. They don't have
Which
to
side
say
are you
yes.
on moment? And and it's for people to decide whether they want to stand with workers or they want to still stand with corporate CEOs. More rising for you right after this.